Khi anh sống ở Việt Nam và lấy về Việt Nam, anh có gặp những trở ngại gì không?
Well, there's a lot of challenges I think that Westerner are going to come across when they live in Vietnam. But I think living in Vietnam and married to a Vietnamese woman, the probably number one thing that comes up is going to be language. So if the foreigner is not fluent in Vietnamese, then his wife is going to have to translate basically every transaction that you have, whether that's something as simple as going to a restaurant or if you're trying to negotiate to buy a piece of property or buy a car. So it can be very, very simplistic. It can be very, very complicated. Fortunately, my wife actually has a degree in English. She was educated. She's an English major. And when she finished school, her next two jobs were in translations for Western companies. So she has a lot of experience. But none of that negates the fact that for the rest of your married life, your wife is going to have to translate for you. The first year, that may not be that big of a problem. But after a while, it's really quite a burden you're putting on your wife. Because
your wife working 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Right. Yeah. It kind of puts her in a position where she's on call for you all the time. Because you literally can't do anything. Now this, of course, if you speak the language, that's a separate issue. It's not an issue. But very few Westerners can pick up Vietnamese. Very, 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 very few can actually pick up the language. And it's usually only very young foreigners in their 20s or younger that can fluently speak the language. So that's probably the first big challenge, because it never goes away. It's there every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, for your whole marriage. So
Yeah, agree.
right. And I think
It's always different between you speak your mother tongue and second language. Doesn't matter how fluent you are, doesn't matter how good you are, but you always have to think when you speak.
right.
Cannot compare like your mother tongue.
And I don't know if there's a good resolution for it. I mean, there are some translation apps that I use, like Google, when I go around. So if I go to the grocery store, I can get what I want by Googling it and showing it. But that doesn't help me at all when there's any type of negotiations. If I'm trying to buy something and it's a complex thing, if I'm trying to buy something that requires a negotiation or negotiate a contract, rent a building, do something, it's virtually impossible to do. So that's probably number one. I think number two would be, for most foreigners, would be food. Because depending on where you live is going to depend on how much Western food you can get. So I think we would advise, I think that maybe the wife learn to cook some Western food. Because I love Vietnamese food, and I eat Vietnamese food more times than I do Western food. I've been here 19 years. But we grow up in the West having every food from every culture. So eating a mono diet, one type of food, just gets old from that perspective. So even if the Westerner enjoys Vietnamese food, he's going to want to have Western food, because Western means English and French and German and Italian and Chinese and all the other food we grew up with. So I think the only way around that, and that's something we've been going through in the last year, is you've just really been making a lot of Western food, learning from the basics. But I think that's going to be that's a big thing in a long-term marriage, is the wife learning at least as much as she can about the Western culture. These are for marriages that are staying in Vietnam, right? So, what have you found to be the most difficult thing, sweetheart?
Với mình thì về mối quan hệ với bạn bè, đặc biệt là khoảng cách tuổi nó cách xa nhau, nên là những cái buổi đi gặp bạn bè thì rất là khó để mà cùng đi với ảnh. Thì mình rất là thích khi mà những cái đôi vợ chồng của bạn mình khi mà đi gặp bạn bè cùng với nhau, rồi có những bạn bè cả gia đình, hai gia đình đi chung chơi chung với nhau rất là vui. Nhưng mà trong trường hợp của bọn mình thì nó khó khăn hơn là cái rào cản ngôn ngữ. Cái thứ hai là cái khoảng cách tuổi tác, thì cái sở thích của ảnh nó cũng tương đối khác so với cái người trẻ ở tuổi của mình. Rồi cũng như những cái vấn đề về thức ăn mà anh nói, thì có những cái món ăn mình và bạn bè mình thích, nhưng mà với ảnh thì ảnh chỉ cố gắng để mà hòa đồng, để mà cùng thưởng thức với mọi người thôi, chứ thật sự bản thân ảnh thì không có tận hưởng cho lắm, nên mình cũng hạn chế những cái dịp mà tiệc tùng hay là đi chơi với bạn bè để dẫn ảnh đi, thì nó là một cái hạn chế. Đó là về bạn bè. Còn về gia đình em thì sao, Honey? What you think about my family? Hiểu rồi, ok.
I think family is also probably, arguably, the biggest issue in mixed marriages, right? I know for a fact it's the most amount of misconception around mixed marriages is family with foreigners. I think foreigners have a very poor position, a very poor understanding, and a very poor outlook on that aspect of marrying a Vietnamese woman, because and I know because a lot of my friends are married to Vietnamese women, view it really almost as a detriment to the marriage, as a problem to the marriage. And I don't really understand that philosophy, because growing up in my age, in my country, being close to your wife's family was a very important thing. So I don't know why that would change all of a sudden because we come to Asia. So I think it's going to be the single biggest thing in a marriage. So Westerners should really get some sort of understanding of it, and the Vietnamese woman should have some understanding of what the Westerners thinking. So when a Vietnamese woman meets a Western man, it may be one of the things she needs to discuss with him before it gets too serious and too far down the line, right? In our case, it worked out. But most Western men in Vietnamese marriages, it becomes a problem later in the marriage. And I think that's partially the woman's fault, because she's just wanting to get married and deal with any headaches that may come up later. But the Western perspective is we discuss it now and figure it out before we go too far down, right? Am I? And no, you can leave it on. Am I? And so if you don't have a good understanding of what your wife wants, as far as your role in her family, you're going to have problems, significant problems down the road, right? Am I? Okay, I'll order it. So, I personally believe that it is a tremendous honor to take care of your wife's family, if that is what the situation is going to be. I don't understand why Westerners see that in a negative light. It's not particularly an expensive thing to do. It's not like the West, where these things would be really a very expensive undertaking. It's actually life in Vietnam is very, very, very inexpensive, especially if you stay out of the big cities, right? If you stick in Saigon, it can be almost as expensive as the West. But when you're living outside of Saigon, and you'll find that the cost of living drops by about 90%. And also, again, why would someone not want to be in a position where they could help a group of people? And why not, if you're going to help a group of people, be your family, right? In the West, we go to a lot of time and trouble to help other people, right? In other countries. And we do all these things, I think more times than not for our ego than anything else. But now you have this immediate group of people that's around you that's now your family. And if you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can help them, then I think it's something that your wife's going to really appreciate. It's something that your wife's going to look for. She would look for it whether you're a Westerner or Vietnamese. It is very much part of the culture. And it's something that I believe that if you don't work it out with your wife prior to, it would be a real issue as the marriage goes on, right? So something that they should probably, if they get more serious, I think the Vietnamese girl would be really better off if she spent a little bit of time with this man she's going to marry and say, what is your thinking on my family? What is your thinking on, where do you want us to be? Should we help them a little bit? Can we help them a lot? Could we help maybe just my parents? Could we help my parents and my sisters? And because there's education, there's things you have to look at when you're dealing with the whole family. It's not just going to be the mother and father. And work that out and see if there's a comfort level where your husband would like to be. And maybe his comfort level is, I don't mind helping your parents, but for your brother and your sister and the family will have to find some way of doing that themselves. Or I'm comfortable at this level, or comfortable at that level. And also for the Westerner, it will give him a good indication of where his wife is, right?
And I think that the husband become the one of member of the wife family too.
Right.
When you help each other, that's
Right.
family do.
Right.
Help each other.
Right.
Right. So when you married, you become one.
Right.
So you should consider the wife's parent, the wife
Right.
family as your family.
Right.
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 And my family helped you a lot too.
Sure.
Right. Especially you are in Vietnam.
Right.
Right. This is your family.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I'm repeating myself. I just don't understand the Western perspective that I've heard from Westerners all the years I've been here, that it's a headache to do that, or they don't want to. Like, I don't go to a lot of family events. I don't necessarily go to family weddings or family funerals or any, because I just don't want to, right? But I can do that because I'm still with the family and I help the family. So it's not seen as me not wanting to participate in the family, because I am participating in the family, right?
Yes.
At a more important level,
Yeah.
right? And again, I don't know, I'm still a little bit unclear why Westerners have taken a negative position on that when it's remarkably inexpensive to help a large group of people in a very profound way. And you could even look at it as self-serving, because the benefits you receive and the way this makes Vietnam feel more like home. Because we're already ostracized in so many different forms and fashions. Legally, we have no position here, right? For gentlemen like myself, I don't have the language. So it's hard to merge with the culture in the first place. But this is an easy opportunity and an easier way to do that. Em ơi, trà sữa, đúng không? My Vietnamese is horrible, but I just can't get the tones of it. But I think that's probably the easiest way to ingratiate yourself with society and the culture, is to embrace your wife's family. And all of the negative things I've heard over the years just aren't true. Have never come to pass. It's been a very enjoyable, probably the single most enjoyable thing about life in Vietnam is the relationship I have with my wife's family, because it's trust me, it can be a wonderful experience, even as enjoyable as your relationship with your wife.
Yeah. It's more about willingness. It's more about kindness. It's not all just about money.
Right.
It's about caring.
Right.
Yeah, show your care. So
Yeah, I think the money aspect of it is the most irrelevant.
yeah,
That's where people get in trouble. They make that an important issue. That's not the issue, right? The issue is, like any other financial aspect of our life, we decide we can live in a certain house at so much a month, or we can spend so much on food, or we can spend so much on entertainment. The family is just another portion of that, and then you allocate a certain amount of funds to that, and then you know where you're at, right? So you sit down with the wife, can take care of it. I don't need to try to negotiate. But my wife could sit down as she's had with her mother, and everybody says, "Mother, how much does it cost to run the house a month?" Great. Okay, so we would like to support that, right? and then we just move forward and support that, and it all comes out in the open, and nothing negative has ever come from that approach. Or again, you hear lots of rumors within the expat community that this can happen, and it can be a headache, it can be a nightmare. I've experienced none of it, and I've been here for a long time. All right, so that's something that should be really discussed a lot before they get married. So I think it's a little bit off topic of this video, but I think it's important, which is, where does a Westerner meet a good Vietnamese girl? And as important, where can a good Vietnamese girl meet a good Western guy? How did she know this is a good guy, right? But I think that should be a whole separate video, because it's not necessarily related directly to marriage. And there's a lot of things to discuss when it comes to that. But it's one of those areas that I think Vietnamese women have no idea how to really look for a good Vietnamese Western man. And the Western man has no idea at all where to find a traditional girl. So I think we should do that, but as a separate video.
Okay.
All right? Okay, come on.